Welcome to Candid Conversations, where we take a thoughtful look at what it means to follow Jesus in today's world. I'm Jonathan Youssef. Today we're talking with Justin Whitmel Earley, a husband, father of four, attorney, and author of several books, including The Common Rule, Habits of the Household, and his newest release, The Body Teaches the Soul. In this conversation, we unpack how the physical shapes the spiritual, why our habits matter more than we think, and how the gospel offers freedom for the soul and the whole person. If you're overwhelmed by the pace of life or longing to reconnect your faith with your daily rhythms, this episode is for you. Let's get started. Justin, I've heard someone refer to you as Justin Earley. Do you like using your middle name, or is that just like a publishing thing?
I do love it. It was my grandfather's first name, and so when I get the chance, I like it Justin Whitmel Earley.
Yeah.
My first son's name is Justin Whitmel Earley Jr., but he goes by Whit, so I'm just trying to keep that unique middle name alive.
Very cool. I do love that. You've written a number of books, in particular Habits of the Household, and a book we're going to talk about today, The Body Teaches the Soul. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Candid Conversations.
You're so welcome, Jonathan. Honored to be here.
I wonder, just because I've heard a little bit of your story, Justin, and I think it's profound, and it really sets the stage for your writing. It's the way that God has uniquely equipped you and worked in your life. And so I wonder if you could just set us up with a little bit of what your upbringing was like, what led your crossroads, and how you came to writing these books.
Absolutely. I have now taken to calling this my second testimony.
Good.
Because praise God, the Lord is never done doing new things in our life.
Amen.
So I came to faith in Jesus at a young age, a wonderful Christian family that I'm still so grateful for. In fact, they all live in Richmond, and we still have Sunday lunch every Sunday with my parents and my five brothers and sisters. Yeah, it is. It was one I write about occasionally. So I grew up in a wonderful family. I went to University of Virginia, was an English literature major, and then I moved to China, actually, to be a missionary through Campus Crusade.
Yeah.
And I would have done that for a long time, but I had a calling experience on the streets of China where I felt like the Lord calling me to go live missionally within law and business. Still the only person I've met that it felt called to be a corporate lawyer, but I mean it.
The mission
it's true.
field.
I'm not kidding.
They
need Jesus.
That's right.
So I, in my late 20s, went to law school as a man on a call. I'm like driving towards a mission. And I look back now and I think I should have been a better missionary, because while my head was in a great place, in habit, I assimilated to the culture. I assimilated to the usual practices of law school and lawyering. And so in my first year of lawyering, this kind of came crashing down. I was married, had two boys. Fortunately, just preview the story, I'm still married and now I have four boys. So,
Little caveat.
At the time I was married and two boys, new law career. And Jonathan, I collapsed into mental unhealth, as actually a lot of people do in their transition from like late 20s to early 30s. This is not like a thing. Anxiety epidemic is a thing, particularly for lawyers. We have really bad mental health outcomes. But it was very confusing to me, Jonathan, because I had, half a seminary degree, Master of Arts in Religion that I was working on through RTS, for example. I was like well-trained in my missionary year. Yeah, you know it. You've been there. So I had a great worldview. Like I had paid a lot of attention to my head.
Yeah.
And, of course, like I'm a lawyer, I'm a writer, an English literature major, a thinker. And so I was devastatingly confused about how I could be preaching this gospel of peace in my head and sincerely believing it for all that I could tell.
Sure.
And yet I was living in a body that was a nervous wreck of anxiety. And this was a very difficult time for me. It was very dark. I mean, the mental health stuff got dark enough to where I was having some like suicidal thoughts and completely falling apart.
Yeah.
We could go at length. The whole story could be about like how the Lord helped me out of this time. But I will say, in brief, there's just two things to be noted. One, this was the time in my life that the Lord used to show me that if your head goes one way, but your habits go the other, your heart tends to follow the habits.
Yeah.
And two, because of that, it was the time in my life where for the first time I started to realize why spiritual disciplines and physical disciplines are so impactful to your emotional health, your physical health, your spiritual health, your everything. Because we are shaped in no small part by what I would call the liturgies of our daily habits. And so I'm so thankful for that dark time in my life now because the Lord had taught me so much through it. And all of my writing in the past decade, as all of my life, I only write about stuff that the Lord is actually doing in my life, at least so far.
Right.
And so all of my past decade has been tinkering with enjoying the Lord's grace and love through the spiritual and physical disciplines, and then writing to other people about why I would love to see them do the same.
Yeah, and you're tapping into something that's your own situation, but it's obviously finding resonance with so many other people who are reading your stuff or being told, "Hey, you're dealing with this, you need to read something like this." And
Yeah.
and you can read ahead of the guy who's saying, "Hey, I went down this path and this is what happened, and I'm trying to help you kind of curtail that and not have to
Yeah.
follow the same trajectory." Justin, I wonder if we could go back for a minute because this is always interesting to me. Can you tell me, give us a little snapshot of what mission in China looked like, and then what mission in sort of law looked like?
Yeah. So when I was a missionary in China, I actually did two versions of it. One, I was doing campus evangelism, which was hanging out with students, like a lot of time in lunchrooms and the basketball courts and dorms,
Yeah.
like bonding over whatever they wanted to do, whether it was practicing English, like playing the guitar, basketball, like going out to eat,
Yeah.
and cultivating friendships that gave us opportunities. And they were ample. Like there were so many opportunities. People in China are so interested.
Yeah.
Like one of the first questions they'll ask you is, "Do you believe in God?" Like, and
This
I'll
is
be like,
too easy.
"Glad you asked." Like, I do actually. And they're like, "But seriously?" And they're like, "Yeah, no, I think it's really tenable." And they're just, yeah. When I was there, at least in 2006 to 2011, students were so interested, and so that's what it looked like. Lots of conversations, and then what we would do is if someone was interested in learning more about Jesus to the point of like they were either professing faith or they were showing commitment to a campus Bible study enough that they were coming for about a year, we would hand them over to the underground house church in China, where they could be discipled by Chinese pastors and not by like a
Westerner.
a Westerner, like who's like decent Mandarin for a white guy, but like
Not good
can't
enough.
really not really like discipleship level. So that's what it looked like. I also, though, in my later years in China, actually moved into a arts and culture ministry, and this actually will help people tie like how did I get to being like thinking missionally within corporate lawyering. We were starting to realize that sharing the gospel was one part of how God was changing the Chinese people. Christians in China had very little conception of what it would look like to apply their Christianity to their home life or their education in college or like being a member of a church. They didn't have a family that did this. What does that look like? Or how does it change the way you like engage with movies and TV and arts and culture? We did everything basically except politics because that's the quickest way to get kicked out of China. As it turns out, it's the quickest way to get people mad at you in America too. So it's like we all have this problem. But
It's a global problem, I think.
yeah, Jonathan, I mentioned this just because this was the place where I started to realize that being an ambassador for Christ does not just have bearing on individuals, and though it's probably supremely important there, it has bearing on like what kinds of cultures and societies do we live in, and are they ones that are helpful to
Right.
the plausibility structures, if you will, to becoming a disciple of Jesus. Like it matters what systems you live under, and depending on where you are and what time you are, you really are scared of that statement or you really like it. When you're talking about like Christian discipleship, like, hey, our structures of technology matter. People are like, yeah. If you're like, hey, our economic structures matter. They're like, well, hold on, what kind?
What do you mean by that? Yeah.
I believe in the Abraham Kuiper sense that every
Yeah.
square inch of the universe, Lord Jesus is over there crying out, mine.
Mine. Yeah.
And thus, every one of us, in whatever vocation we're doing, should consider ourselves a missionary to that part of the world, and saying, what does, and here I'm going to answer your second part of your question.
Yeah.
What does corporate law look like if an ambassador for Christ is doing it? And I'm 10 years into that journey, and I'm still figuring that out. So I don't have a playbook. That will be a book I hope to write, Lord willing, someday. But, I can tell you for sure, it looks like talking like a disciple of Christ talks. It looks like trying to think through the structures of a law firm and saying, are these healthy? I'm building a law firm now. I used to be in one.
Right.
And we have active conversations about does doing the billable hour this way, or this kind of requirement, or this engagement with clients, is that the way a disciple would do it? Is that good for a human being? And I'm also just taking pleasure in being part of the common grace of the world where, believe it or not, the world grinds to a halt if you don't have contracts. Covenant, as it turns out, is sort of a big biblical concept.
Yeah.
And it's a big concept for how humans interact. I know no one likes to read the fine print, and nobody likes to think hard about a contract, but it is covenants of trust, an understandable risk, understandable trust, that keep your world spinning every day, whether it's your retirement investment accounts, whether it's your phone service, whether it's the house that you bought, or selling a business, or whether starting one, or organizing a nonprofit. I actually take great joy in seeing the common grace of God through covenants and contracts. And so I write and negotiate them for a living.
Well, and that's how God communicates to his people.
As it turns out.
Imagine that. It really is. We have to be a society that's built on trust, because once trust is eroded, well, you have left really anarchy, which is the only system of government God doesn't endorse.
Yeah. Wow. Well put, Jonathan. I like that.
Well, you and I have the same education in terms of minus law school for me.
Yeah.
Well, and we always joke lawyers and preachers are pretty much the same person. We're just trying to win the argument.
They both talk too much.
That's exactly right. I've never heard that before. Just kidding. Okay, so for you, why law? Was it just a proclivity that you had? What sort of opened that avenue? Could you have gone into finance or some other thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. In China, I was really getting into creative writing, and I was really getting into this mindset that I just described, that wherever I went, it was going to be as an ambassador for Christ. It was a day, actually, on the streets of Shanghai that the Lord really used to pivot me. I one day walked into what is the Times Square of Shanghai, China, basically like the city center where all the tourists go. And I was approached by a black market thief selling a stolen laptop, by a drug dealer trying to sell me marijuana. I walked by a couple open brothels, all within the same 5 minutes. Those three things were super common. What was unique about this day was that I also, in the middle, passed a political protester. I had never seen one before in China. I never saw one again. This old woman was only out there for probably 3 to 6 minutes before she was arrested, but I happened to watch it. Everything I'm talking about, Jonathan, could be a way longer story. I have so many interesting details from that moment. But
that's quite a day.
Suffice it to say, it was a wild day. I mean, I actually watched her get arrested. I actually sort of talked to the cop and tried to talk him out of it. It didn't work. I realized that 4 of these things I saw, 4 for 4 were illegal. 1 for 4 was enforced. That was the one that is, political protesting will get you landed in jail. 3 of them made you good money. And the Lord in his providence just used that moment to be like, how do you get to a cultural moment where you're paid to break the law in these 3 ways, and yet the one sort of brave act of neighbor love, this person was actually protesting for the poor in the countryside and saying they were being treated unfairly. That was the one that not just didn't make you money, it got you in jail. And you can run a lot of ways with that, but the sort of prompt I just felt the Lord pushing me to very clearly in the days after that was, you go figure out what it means to bring my justice, my love, my concern for the righteousness, for the poor, for everything. justice is such a big word.
Yeah.
No, nobody knows what they mean when they say it, and
No.
I'm probably included in that. It's bigger than our capacity to handle. But it seems to me in the wake of that learning law and learning business would help me spend a lifetime leaning in that direction and trying to be an influence in it. And I'm only 10 years in, so we'll see what the Lord does in this call.
I'll interview you in 10 more years.
I'd like that.
That'd be great. I'm curious in terms of like bandwidth, workload, habits. What did those look like in China? And then what did they look like when you came to the States, which led to a burnout, which then led to kind of all this discovery?
Well, I did start to get into thinking carefully about time in China. I remember I started to keep track of my day through a diary for the first time in that phase, and it was because we had to tell our superiors like what kind of time we were spending with Chinese students, so we had to record it anyway. And I was like, in retrospect, I became a lawyer early because I started recording my time.
Yeah, billable hours.
But I don't know. I was young in those years. This was between the ages of 22 and 27. So it was just interesting that I started to think about the time as the currency of purpose. I wouldn't have said it like that then, but I was like, all of our callings, all of our days are spent using the same currency that all of us have the exact same amount of, at least as it pertains to each day.
Right.
But I wouldn't say I was particularly a person of habit. In fact, it was very the opposite. I was in arts ministry, creative writing, finding his way to law, but a high EQ. My superior at some point had to tell me to get a planner. He was like, look, you can't do this job if you don't have a planner. I'm telling you dates and you're not going to remember them. I'm like, I'll remember them. He's nice. So I was like very freewheeling. In law school, I probably shot to the other side of saying like, I need to figure out how to do this. I need to figure out how to be the best.
Yeah.
But all my habits were unconsciously adopted of like, okay, people are staying up this late, waking up this early. People are spending this much time on their screens. Also had my first two sons during that period. So my wife and I were like, struggling through, nights of no sleep. And
Right.
So I think the most significant thing to note about all that is that in China, it was like very little structure. That was my personality. In law school, life became highly structured, but I didn't really know or choose those structures. I didn't really understand what they were. And this is where I think every modern American is mostly like me. You're living according to a regimented program of habit, and you, for the most part, have no idea what they are. Your phone stats could tell you, or if you kept a diary, you could figure it out.
Yeah.
But how you spend your days is how you spend your life. And how you spend your day, most of it, at least 40%, according to research, is by habit. The choices you're making are not entirely conscious ones. They're unconscious actions that we don't call choices, we call habit. And so to take hold of habit is to take hold of life itself. It really is. It was that hunger for life, Jonathan. Well, not to mention trying to work myself out of a mental health crash. Like it was that like emergency mode of, oh my gosh, I'm a slave to 1,000 invisible masters who don't love me back. There are people in Silicon Valley making money off my attention.
Yeah.
There are people that are programmers of shows and apps. There are people in the law firm who don't, I'm not saying they're maniacal, but like I was a billable hour to them. Every hour of my time was a profit margin to them. And I was realizing I never thought about all these habits until they crushed me. And then suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, by not having any program of habits, I've become a slave to someone else's program. I thought I was free to choose. I was very not free to choose.
Yeah.
And everyone listening to this is like this. Like you have a master.
Yeah.
The problem is only the master named Jesus is the one with an easy yoke, a light burden. He's the only one who loves you back. It's the only reason Paul can call us slaves to righteousness and still say that it's for freedom that Christ set us free, because only in slavery to Jesus do we find our freedom. And so now I run at habits because I'm like, oh, I want to live a beautiful life. I want to live a hedonistically holy life. It's sort of John Piper-esque, but maybe invented that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm actually obsessed with habit now, because I realize this is the way to lean in to freedom. Ironically, it's through habit and discipline, and to beauty. I like you look at any great artist, what do? A lot of really small things to create a masterpiece.
Yeah.
That's a novel, that's a painting, that's a life. And the greatest work of art, I think, is life itself. So that's why I love Habit now.
Walk us a little bit through the discovery of that. Like, obviously, like you said, there's a sense of you had this crisis moment. So there was a sense of like emergency, but what was the great revelation of, wow, habits are actually the things that are for me? I mean, that's not something that people kind of just come to and go, oh,
No.
I figured that out on my own,
Fortunately, Providence is on, my side here. I had a sit down with two of my best friends a year into my mental health collapse. Their names are Matt and Steve. I still hang out with them a lot. And I remember this day like it was yesterday. I put down a moleskin journal on the table. It had some like daily and weekly rhythms that I wanted to structure my new year around. I came there by way of crisis. Like I was still in the dark period of my mental health journey. I tried counseling and tried medication. And while I fully support counseling and selectively support medication in the right circumstances for the right people, a lot of caveats there. Neither of those things were like fundamentally changing my state. And I was like, I'll try anything. So my wife and I see providentially now, but kind of randomly, Jonathan said like, let's put some like guardrails around your days and weeks. There were things like scripture before phone. I didn't call it that then, but it was the idea I wouldn't check my emails until after I had at least a little short quiet time. One of them was meeting with friends at least once a week to talk about my struggles. I now call that the habit of community and vulnerability. One of them was just try to have at least one meal a day with other people so that I wasn't constantly skipping food or eating at my desk. We talk about this more in Body Teaches the Soul, the spirituality of food and community. There was others. There was a lot of us. But the thing to note is that I didn't think any of this would matter because most of the people hearing what I just said, and I could throw Sabbath in there, by the way, take a day off every week and actually worship and rest. People would be like, yeah, but I'm struggling with like real life problems. Like I have like actual like anxiety, or I have like actual,
Right.
I had no idea how much the most ordinary habits of our days and weeks affect our souls in the most extraordinary ways. I had no idea how physical so many of the spiritual disciplines were. I had no idea how grace-filled the word discipline was in the first place, that like I wouldn't be contributing anything to my salvation, but I would be experiencing a lot of it by following these biblical spiritual disciplines that, that are well set out for us in Scripture. So I just had no idea, Jonathan. It was, honestly, it felt like accidental from my perspective. Of course, providential from the Lord's, and that's how grace works. My little step towards him, he was like, I'm going to massively sweep you up.
You have no idea.
And my life started to drastically change. So it was in the wake of being like, what is happening, that I started really diving in and reading, and then, as it turns out, writing about the spiritual disciplines, about habit, both spiritually and physically. And that's been the last 10 years. But it started because they just honestly started changing my life. And I wanted to be like, I'm not going to stop this, but I want to know why it's working.
Yes.
And I also want to know why it's not legalistic, because I've worried about that a lot.
Sure.
And praise God, I found that it's not.
Why do we minimize our habits or not even recognize them? What are kind of the barriers for people having a clear view on that?
I think there's a lot of reasons. So there's probably gonna be a lot of ways to answer that question. So just know this answer is probably one of them.
Sure.
I think that there is a real Gnosticism brewing in the last. This is going to sound like a grandiose statement, so historians can qualify me or theologians can qualify me. I think there's a real Gnosticism brewing and growing really since the Enlightenment that has like birthed an American spirituality that is heady, but to a fault. So like I'm all for the headiness, right? Like I love reading, I love writing, I love learning. Like I could point to you to like so many Bible verses that say how you should meditate on the law and learn the truth and these things are good things, but there's a Gnosticism underneath it that I think that we think that's basically what Christ created us for. Like that's
Yeah.
basically what a human being is, that we are, Jamie Smith calls it a brain on a stick, or that we're just a thinking thing, or that the secular world would call it like we're a computer. Like, and by the way, it's brewing in our age too. Like,
Yeah.
think about this, Jonathan. How else could people see AI put words on a screen and think, oh my gosh, it might be alive? Like, how else do you get to the point where like AI might actually be like it might actually be life,
Right.
because it's thinking, it's processing words. Like that right there shows you. And I laugh because like I thought the same thing until like, guys, God made us with a body. Like,
Yes.
that it doesn't have a body. It is literally words on a screen that humans program, and we are so Gnostic that we see a thought process and we're like, it's life itself.
Right.
Where I want to be like, well, sure, I see why you think that, but the glory of a human is that God made us physical.
Yeah.
Like, and then called it very good. He called everything else in creation good.
Right.
He called human bodies very good. He
Yeah.
made the image of God. And this is a philosophical answer to your practical
Great.
question.
No, but it's good.
I think only when we conceive of the heights of spirituality as simply knowing and processing the right information can we be convinced that our ordinary habits are of little spiritual consequence. And so you hear of something like a pattern of prayer, and you're like, I mean, that's nice. I don't know. It might be like a little spiritual life hack or legalistic. The important part is whether you know that God hears you. And I'm like, I don't disagree with the importance of knowing that God hears you and the faith that it takes to get there. All I'm saying is typically we know that more and more when we practice prayer. So the significance of engaging in prayer
Yes.
is more important than knowing about prayer.
Exactly.
And actually, like when you say it like that, I think anybody agrees with you. And that's what I'm saying. It's like the significance of following Jesus is as important as knowing about Jesus. Jesus was not very content with, people just knowing who he was. He was like, come follow me.
Yeah.
So that's why I think we ignore habit. There's a lot of other reasons, but that's one reason.
Well, and I feel like the Gnosticism thing picks up on your latest book, The Body Teaches the Soul, and you're right. And even as you were saying it, I thought, why? I think I've fallen for that trap of, I look at artificial intelligence and I think, it's got almost everything, right? It doesn't have a body, but Scripture. Often a lot of the New Testament epistles are actually countering Gnosticism.
Yes, which is why the New Testament is great news for our modern moment. Yes.
Well, interestingly, we worship the body, but then we also ignore the body in the same time, right? I mean, there's
let me give you the other side to the schizophrenia of our moment.
Go
Because
for it, yeah.
you might be, listener, wondering the same thing. It's like, well, hold on. Okay, that actually does sound right, but don't we also have a huge problem of idolizing the body? Oh, yeah. It's called philosophical materialism, and you see it in the form of like longevity obsessions, gym and vanity obsessions, pornography.
Yeah.
The more we've come to the philosophical place that, hey, what you see is what we get. That's it. Like, you are just your brain chemicals. You are just atoms. It's this nothing buttery. I think C.S. Lewis called it. Like, you're nothing but this or nothing but that.
Yeah.
This incredible, and by the way, incredibly dull. And I almost want to say dumb, but I don't want to be critical of, an average person. It's just a weird, nonsensical reduction of the miracle of life to, it's nothing but atoms.
Yes,
when, everything that we've learned about science, and I even mean Big Bang theories and evolution, for example, like these theories have done very little to the point of nothing. Chesterton made this point, by the way, not me. So I'm quoting him. They've done a lot to cast doubt on what reality is. They've done very little to explain what reality is. Okay.
Right.
Like even if it's true that this is how the Lord set creation into motion, it explains nothing about what a human life is. It explains nothing about who we are.
Right.
And that is to say, we are not just bodies. The world is not just what you see. The world is full of principalities and powers. You are a spiritual being. This is Genesis 2:7. God took the dust and breathed the spirit of life into Adam's nostrils. Adam was literally carbon compounds, like organic material, dust. and then this spiritual breath of God animating it, and that's what Genesis calls a living soul. This is what the body teaches the soul is predicated on, this idea that you are a soul. You don't really have a soul so much as you are one. You are a spiritual being that is unique in all of creation. And when in the fall, the spiritual life of you leaves the physical reality of you, we have a name for it. We call that death, and we don't like it. It is the undoing of God's creation. So I would go so far as to say that any philosophy that divorces the spiritual reality of you from the material reality of you is a kind of philosophy of death. So if you take Gnosticism that ignores the body, you get a really bad worldview that's going to be unhelpful for you actually loving God and loving neighbor. If you take materialism, which divorces you from the spiritual life and says you're just a body, you're going to get really weird results. And when you get a world of sin that basically circles them both, and loses track of where we are, you get, and I say this with all compassion, but also all conviction, a transgender movement.
Yeah.
Where that simultaneously worships the body of like, this is like
Who
all I
am.
have.
Yep.
And yet, how Gnostic is it to say who I am is actually not what you see? And I say it with all compassion because this is not like, oh, how stupid. It is just, oh, how far we've fallen.
It's a product
from
of
the
the
glory.
age.
From the glory of what God made us, and that is a spiritual body where you look at the body and say, gender is a gift. Your body is a gift. You are made in the image of God. You are the image of love. Literally, God is love. You are the image bearer of that, which means the great call of life, as Jesus said, is to love God and love neighbor. My friend, that's what your body is for. It's not for asking, how can it look? It is asking, how can it love? And you can run, as I do in The Body Teaches the Soul, everything through that paradigm. What about breathing? What about thinking? What about eating? What about sleeping? What about exercise? What about sickness? What about sex? You can say, don't ignore it. Don't idolize it. How do we love God and love neighbor through it? And now you are in, the fresh air of biblical Orthodox Christianity that has an understanding of what your body is, what it's for, and it has a lot of thoughts on what you ought to do with it.
Well, and it ends up being a balanced approach from the two extremes.
Yes.
Which you're right. That's just where we are right now. That is where our age is. We're either just a brain or we're just chemicals,
a spirit trapped in a body.
Right. Yeah, and it's about getting freed from this body.
Right.
I want to come back to this. You said this earlier, where you talked about the heart follows the habit. Tell us a little bit how that has formed in you deeply in your understanding of that reality, and then how you kind of pursued that, and then how believers can understand that practically and then execute on that.
Yeah. So I came by this by way of my story. So I was first like, oh my gosh, why is my heart in such a weird place when I know everything correctly? That was my first signal that something was wrong, right? And we talked about that. Well, that led to me doing a lot of reading on habit, which led to me doing a lot of reading on liturgy, which led me to the conclusion that I stated. And I'll give you the brief version of both. Neurologically speaking, one of the first things I learned about habit was that what we're talking about when we talk about habit is your ordinary subconscious to unconscious actions that you put on repeat, and they occur in your lower brain, which means that your upper brain is free. As your lower brain works automatically, your upper brain is free to do really complicated things, which is why some of you can listen to a podcast like this and use your upper brain to engage this thinking while you haven't even been thinking about the safe lane changes that you've made, or the left turn or the right turn. That's great. You're going home safely because of this wonderful power of habit. Well, in a broken world with broken bodies, that gift of God of our brains gets divided and messed up just like everything else. And this is where a bad habit, like, why am I scrolling this website again? Why am I going to this substance again? Or just, why am I snapping at my child like this again? I never want to do this. The commonality that we all have in those moments is none of us want to live like that. Our upper brains know better. Our discipleship mode of I know I shouldn't be thinking about this kind of thing. I should be trusting God and being at peace. All of us know better. but the part of our brain that knows the better is not the part that's churning along in habit. And this is why psychologists, psychiatrists, neurologists, even pop psychology will tell you you become your habits, because your lower brain leads you places that your upper brain is like just catching up on. Now, of course, this can be redeemed. Of course, it is by our upper brain, and our frontal cortex is like the glory, like it's the glorious gift that God gave us. We can change our habits, right? But when we don't think through it, the lens of habit, our habits lead the way automatically, and we become formed in what we do. This is where the reality of habit is very, very close to the reality of what's happening in liturgy, which of course is also a thing that plays in habits.
Yeah.
Because what you're talking about when you talk about liturgies, we're not just talking about like Catholic or Anglican or Orthodox high church structures. We're talking about what are the norms of worship. We set up quiet times or prayer services or orders of worship, or of course, sacraments, or the capital L liturgy of the Catholic Church, for example. The idea there is that we think through things that we should do on repeat, because we think that they're going to form us in the character of Christ, which is a great goal. We're going to be formed in the image of the triune God that we worship. In fact, the Psalms say, those who make and trust in idols become like them. Worship forms you, right? And my great realization was that, oh my gosh, I was reading both of these like sort of literatures at the same time, and I was like, habit and liturgy are so similar. They're both things that we do over and over, subconsciously to unconsciously, both things that change us and form us. What's the only difference? The only difference is liturgy admits it's about worship. Habits are just obscuring what we worship. But oh my gosh, I suddenly realized, I can still remember where I was like sitting when I was reading and underlining and thinking about this. I was like, my life is filled with digital liturgies. My life is filled with liturgies of worship through my iPhone to some unknown master. No wonder I'm becoming, those who make and trust in idols become like them. I'm becoming like something I don't love and that doesn't love me back. No wonder my mind is falling apart. That was the beginning of realizing what I now mean and sum up by saying your head can go one way, but when your habit goes the other way, your heart follows the habits. You're formed in the image of what you worship, and habit is the territory of worship. So that's what we want to take control of when we want to say, let's come back to worship of God.
There's more of this conversation, but let's stop here today. Thank you for joining us for part 1 of my conversation with Justin Whitmel Earley. As you can hear, his story and insight into the power of habits, the body, and spiritual formation runs deep. In part 2, we continue unpacking how these rhythms shape our emotional and spiritual health. And Justin gets very practical about rest, sleep, stewardship, and how we disciple our families through the habits of everyday life. You won't want to miss it. Join us next Tuesday for part 2 of this candid conversation.